we have to talk about three very important characters too in the book, and that would be Andy Warhol, Bit, and Truman Capote. Um,
Yeah.
the bookends of those we'll talk about that, but let's go to the middle, Bit. There's a scene early on where he's at Andy Warhol's factory, and Paulie goes in there and he sits down and he sits on some lube, and he has to get Bit to cover him so that he's kind of sidestepping while his ass is covered because he doesn't want to be seen with lube all over him or what he thinks is cum. Uh, it's a hilarious scene, but it ties into some later dramatic scenes. It's interesting how you were mentioning, I think, in our last discussion of greasing the wheels to use humor kind of as a leveling device, and you see that with the previous thing where we're talking about Aunt Essie and a few other scenes too. Talk about the relationship with Bit, with Paulie and Big Frank, because they certainly are very different. And Bit is more a sidekick to Big Frank, whereas with Paulie, he's always seems to be much more on guard. You see different aspects of their characters by the way they interact with each other.
Yeah, well, Bit is one of those characters, like I said, that unlike Big Frank, Bit and Paulie are characters that are flexible enough in time and whatnot that I can put them in other books. Bit appears and has a secondary role, or maybe even tertiary role, in my spy book, because that's set in the late 20th century. So Bit von Rheingold is a character who I mentioned had appeared in one or two short stories, or been talked about in some short stories. He was involved with one of the dwarf female characters in some of my early short stories. He was then later mentioned. Elsie Little was the character he was ostensibly involved with. Then he got his own book, Bit of Golem, where I sketched out, and this is Bit in the mid-O's, about a 70-year-old man or so, looking back on his life once he's become a billionaire. And it's sort of my take on Bit the pornographer becomes Citizen Kane. And in that book, Bit seemingly dies at the end. I don't know if you've read that book.
Yes,
but then we find out in this book that that Bit, older Bit, is still living as of the writing of this book of 2013, 2014. So people will say, but I thought you said he was dead. Well, that's just a literary device, and we don't know who the narrator of Bit of Golem is. We do know, for example, that whatchamacall, Manny Cole is the narrator, ostensible narrator of this book, the book within the book, and so we have a conflict there, and it shows that the narrator of Bit of Golem may very well be even more unreliable looking backwards than Manny Cole is. But that was just a function of me deciding, well, I didn't want to really kill off Bit. It's like having a movie where the hero dies in the end, but he proves to be such a popular film or such a popular hero that you bring him back and say, nah, he didn't really die. And you could, there are some hints that Bit may be the narrator of that book. So it could be that Bit was trying to maybe portray himself in a melodramatic or kind of heroic fashion in that book by dying at the end. But nonetheless, Bit's relationship with Paulie and Big Frank is that he's at that time a pornographer who has made stag films from the late 50s on. He's trying to go legitimate. He's had two or three minor Sam Fuller type films. Sam Fuller was a B filmmaker in America who made films about gangsters and whatnot, and he's considered one of the better ones, and he is one of the better B filmmakers in American history. And so Bit is on that track. He references Sam Fuller a few times. For some reason or another, Bit von Rheingold, the Jewish pornographer, dwarf, Big Frank Concetto, this 6'6", 6'7", 250 to 300 pound mass of muscle, and then Andy Warhol becomes sort of a Three Musketeers pals throughout the mid 60s. And Paulie's on the outside because Paulie owns the company that Big Frank is running the pornography side of the business. We do meet. I think there's a scene in here where we do meet the Iceman again. I think he makes a delivery in one of the scenes here. Richard Kuklinski, the real Iceman killer, has a brief cameo in this book. because he was involved in pornography too, and so you it's a good way to tie all of these things together, all of these little scenes together, um, because Paulie doesn't like it. He keeps calling him versions of gold something, gold finger, gold fish, gold hammer. And
And he
you,
calls him dwarf often too.
yeah, and you get the sense that Paulie isn't really. He's either forgetting Bit's name because he's so contemptible of the little Jewish dwarf, or he's just doing it to get under Bit's skin. But Bit doesn't dare speak up, and he always calls Paulie boss. Big Frank and him, for like I said, have this odd friendship develop. They go once to the initial, I think it's Mr. Olympia or Mr. Universe bodybuilding contest, and they meet Joe Wider, who is a real character, and his wife, a real character. At the first Mr. Universe contest, and Andy is hyperventilating at seeing all these sweaty male bodies, bodybuilders, and so there's a lot of these kinds of little scenes where we get that. But Paulie, like I said, Paulie is constantly yelling, Goldfinger, get in here, and so it's a good kind of tension there.